A single dad janitor spilled coffee on the CEO's laptop, then froze when he saw what was on the screen, unaware it was the very man who would save his daughter's life. "You are a nobody, a complete and utter failure, and you will not lay a hand on my money." The rain hammered down on the glass roof of the Blackwood Enterprises tower like 1,000 desperate fists, a relentless and wild symphony of despair that perfectly mirrored the storm inside Leo's own weary soul. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the vast, cavernous executive suite for a split second before darkness swallowed it whole, revealing polished marble floors and gleaming chrome that felt like another world, cold and untouchable. He was nothing here. Leo pushed his cleaning cart, the squeak of its worn wheels echoing in the sterile silence, a pathetic sound in a place built on commanding pronouncements and the crisp rustle of billion-dollar deals. His reflection, pale and gaunt, stared back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows, a man made of shadows and exhaustion, his janitor's uniform hanging loosely on his thin frame, a threadbare shield against a world that had offered him no comfort. Every push of the mop, every wipe of a cloth, was a prayer for his daughter, Eva. Her small, fragile face was the only light in his hollow existence, a flickering candle he desperately tried to protect from the biting wind of their poverty. Her illness, a rare and cruel affliction of the lungs, was a constant, heavy fog in his heart, and the mountain of medical bills was a peak he could never hope to summit. The doctors used words like experimental and prohibitive, words that were simply different ways of saying impossible for a man like him. He often skipped meals, the gnawing hunger in his stomach a dull ache he welcomed, a small penance he could pay to ensure Eva had her medicine and a little fruit for her lunch. He was a ghost haunting the halls of the wealthy, invisible to the titans of industry who strode these corridors during the day, their expensive leather shoes never touching the same ground his worn-out boots did. Tonight, the weight was unbearable. Another notice had arrived, this one printed on stark red paper, a final warning from the hospital. The unspoken threat of withholding care shimmered behind the cold, bureaucratic words. He felt his chest tighten, a familiar sensation of panic and helplessness. He was failing her. He entered the CEO's office, the heart of the entire gleaming empire, a place he was only meant to enter after its powerful occupant had long since departed. The air was different here, thick with the scent of old leather, expensive cologne, and an almost electric hum of power. A single amber-hued lamp cast a golden glow across a massive mahogany desk, illuminating stacks of crisp documents and a sleek, impossibly thin laptop, left open. Slumped over the desk, his head resting on his arms, was a man. Leo froze. He was not supposed to find anyone here, especially not in the throne room of the king himself, Mr. Alistair Blackwood. The man was a legend, a myth whispered about in the break rooms, a recluse who had built this empire from nothing, known for his ruthless business acumen and his icy, commanding demeanor. But the man before him did not look like a king. He looked broken. His impeccable suit was rumpled, his dark hair disheveled. A quiet, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his broad shoulders. He looked like a man drowning in a silent, personal sea of grief. Beside his hand, dangerously close to the edge of the desk, sat a mug of black coffee, steam still faintly rising from its surface. Leo's training screamed at him to retreat, to vanish back into the shadows where he belonged. He was not meant to witness this moment of raw, human vulnerability from a god of this world. He began to back away, his movements slow, careful not to make a sound that would shatter the sacred hush of the room. He just wanted to disappear. The man suddenly jolted awake, a sharp gasp tearing through the silence as if surfacing from a nightmare. His arm flailed blindly, catching the mug of coffee and sending it hurtling sideways, a dark, hot projectile aimed directly at the open screen of the gleaming laptop. Time seemed to splinter into 1,000 tiny shards. Leo saw the trajectory, the inevitable collision, the destruction of a machine that likely cost more than he earned in 5 years. A torrent of thoughts crashed through him. His job, the immediate termination, the black mark on his record, the final nail in the coffin of his desperate struggle. He could let it happen. He could watch it fall and no one would ever know he was there. It was not his fault. It was not his responsibility. His own life was a series of unfortunate spills, of messes he couldn't clean up. Why should he save this stranger, this king in his castle, from a minor inconvenience? But then, another thought, purer and stronger than the fear, rose from the depths of his being. It was the innate gentleness that Eva had inherited, the quiet resolve that allowed him to face each day. It was the simple, unwavering belief that you help when you can, no matter the cost. He didn't know why. He just knew he had to. Without another moment of hesitation, he lunged forward. There was nothing to use, nothing to block the spill. Nothing except the one precious thing he carried with him always, tucked into the pocket of his coat. It was Eva's comfort blanket, a small, threadbare square of soft blue wool he'd carried since she was a baby. It smelled of her, of soap and faint sickness and innocent dreams. He carried it so he could hold it to his face during his long, lonely shifts and feel, for a fleeting moment, that she was with him. It was his most sacred possession. He ripped it from his pocket and, in a single, fluid motion, thrust it over the keyboard and screen of the laptop. The hot coffee soaked into the worn fabric instantly, a dark, ugly stain spreading across the pale blue. The blanket was ruined, its comforting scent replaced by the bitter smell of burnt coffee. But the laptop was safe. A soft hiss was the only sound as the heat was absorbed. Total silence. Leo's heart thudded wildly in his chest, a frantic drum against his ribs. He stood there, trembling, his hand still hovering over the now damp, ruined piece of wool. The man, Alistair Blackwood, stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. They were gray, the color of a stormy sea, and for the first time, Leo saw they were not cold, but haunted, filled with a profound, unspoken sorrow. Mr. Blackwood's gaze drifted from the spoiled blanket to Leo's face, a question forming in their depths that he did not seem to know how to ask. Leo slowly, carefully, peeled the soaked blanket off the laptop. He winced as he saw the permanent, dark stain. A piece of Eva's childhood, a tangible link to her innocence, was gone forever, sacrificed for a piece of machinery. His chest ached with a sudden, sharp pang of loss. And then he saw it. The screen, now clear and untouched by the coffee, glowed brightly in the dim light. It displayed a single, high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of a smiling woman with warm, kind eyes, and a little girl no older than 2, sitting on her lap. The little girl had chubby cheeks, a button nose, and a head of unruly dark curls. She was laughing, her small hand clutching a silver baby rattle that shimmered under the light. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He froze. The little girl in the photograph. She could have been Eva's twin. The same innocent spark in her eyes, the same joyful, unguarded smile. It was a ghost of his own daughter, healthy and vibrant, a vision of what she could be if only the world were kinder. A sob caught in his throat, raw and painful. He felt exposed, as if this stranger's private grief had reached out and touched his own, creating a bizarre and undeniable connection in the silent, opulent office. The world shrank to the glowing screen and the face of a child he had never met but somehow mourned. Mr. Blackwood's voice, when it finally came, was not the commanding boom Leo had expected. It was a quiet, cracked whisper, heavy with an emotion Leo couldn't name. "The blanket," he said, his gaze fixed on the ruined blue fabric in Leo's trembling hands. "Why would you?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The question hung in the air between them. Why would you sacrifice something that clearly meant the world to you for a stranger's machine? Leo couldn't find the words. He felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. He was just a janitor who had overstepped his bounds, who had intruded on a private moment. He shouldn't be here. He mumbled an apology, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll go." He turned to flee, to retreat back to his world of shadows. "Wait." Mr. Blackwood's voice was stronger now, a thread of steel weaving through the quiet rasp. "What is your name?" Leo faltered, his hand on the doorknob. He hesitated, wanting only to be anonymous, invisible. but something in the man's unwavering gaze held him in place. "Leo," he whispered. "My name is Leo." Then he turned and fled, leaving the ruined blanket, a small, stained sacrifice, on the corner of the gleaming mahogany desk. He didn't know it yet, but that single, selfless act had just planted a seed in the barren soil of a shattered heart. A seed that would grow to save everything he held dear. He was gone. The walk home was a blur of rain-streaked streetlights and the relentless hammering of his own anxious thoughts. The biting cold of the night air was nothing compared to the chill that had settled deep within his bones, a premonition of disaster. He had broken every rule, not just of his employment but of the unspoken caste system that governed his life. Janitors did not interact with CEOs. They did not witness their grief. And they certainly did not sacrifice their daughter's precious mementos to save their property. When he finally reached his small, threadbare apartment, the familiar scent of antiseptic and stale, boiled vegetables did little to comfort him. Eva was asleep in her small bed, a tiny lump under a thin, worn quilt. Her breathing was shallow, punctuated by a faint, wheezing sound that was the soundtrack to his every waking fear. He knelt by her side, his heart clenching as he watched her. The absence of the small blue blanket, which usually lay tucked beside her cheek, was a glaring void. He had failed her again, taking away one of her few comforts. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek and fell onto the quilt. He felt like a complete and utter failure. The next morning, the call came. It was his supervisor, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "Leo, don't bother coming in today. Your services are no longer required. Security found you on the executive floor last night. That's a restricted area. We've already mailed your final paycheck." The line went dead. The words echoed in the tiny, silent room. Fired. It was the final blow, the one that shattered his fragile grasp on survival. The red notice from the hospital, the empty cupboards, Eva's labored breathing. It all coalesced into a single, unbearable wave of despair that crashed over him, threatening to pull him under for good. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, the world splintering around him. He had tried to do something good, something pure, and his reward was ruin. It seemed the universe was confirming what he had long suspected. For men like him, virtue was a liability, and kindness was a fool's game. Meanwhile, in his cavernous, sterile penthouse overlooking the city, Alistair Blackwood was a man possessed. Sleep had not come. He had sat at his desk all night, the stained blue blanket resting before him like a sacred relic. He had replayed the janitor's actions over and over in his mind. The man's hollow, haunted eyes, the selfless, instantaneous lunge, the trembling hands, the raw, undisguised pain on his face when he saw the photograph of Alistair's late wife, Amelia, and their daughter, Lily. In a world built on transactions, on quid pro quo and calculated advantage, Leo's act was an anomaly. It was pure. It was an act of sincere, unthinking goodness, performed at a personal cost for a complete stranger. It was a light, a tiny, flickering candle in the profound darkness that had consumed Alistair's life since the accident that had stolen his family. Lily had a blanket just like it, a soft pink one she had called her Huggy, the memory, sharp and agonizing, pierced through the layers of cynical scar tissue he had built around his heart. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than the dull, persistent ache of grief. He felt a seismic shift inside him, a flicker of awe, of intrigue. He felt a renewed purpose. He had to find this man. He had to understand. He had to repay a debt that felt more significant than any financial transaction he had ever made. He called his head of security at dawn. "Find me the janitor who cleaned my office last night." "His name is Leo," the reply, when it came an hour later, was a frustrating dead end. "Sir, the entire night shift contract was terminated this morning. A supervisor named Henderson reported a breach. The man you're looking for is gone. The agency has no forwarding information." A surge of cold fury, an emotion Alistair was far more familiar with, coursed through him. He had let the man slip away. But Alistair Blackwood had not built an empire by accepting defeat. "I don't care what it takes," he said, his voice a low, commanding growl. "Find him. Use every resource we have. I want his name, his address, his entire life story on my desk by noon." He was a man with a new mission. He would find his quiet, dignified savior. He had to. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing descent into a special kind of hell for Leo. He sold what little he had, an old television, a cracked watch, his winter coat, to buy another week's worth of Eva's medication. He stood in line at food banks, the shame of physical weight on his shoulders, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement to avoid the pitying looks of others. He applied for dozens of jobs, anything from dishwashing to manual labor, but his sudden termination from a high-profile company like Blackwood Enterprises was a red flag no one wanted to ignore. Hope was a dwindling resource, more precious and scarce than food or money. Then, the strange things started to happen. One morning, a plain white envelope appeared under his door. There were no markings, no return address. Inside was a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. Tucked within the stack was a small, simple note, its words printed in neat, block letters. For EVA. From a friend. Leo stared at the money, his mind reeling. It was a mistake. It had to be. A clerical error, a delivery to the wrong apartment. He felt a surge of panic, the fear of being accused of theft mixing with the overwhelming temptation the cash represented. This money could pay for Eva's specialist appointment, could fill their empty refrigerator, could keep the eviction notice at bay. He spent the entire day in a state of agitated confusion, but no one came to claim the envelope. By evening, a fragile, trembling sense of hope began to bloom in the barren landscape of his heart. Maybe, just maybe, it was real. 2 days later, the hospital called. It was the billing department, the same stern woman who had delivered the final warning. But her tone was different now, laced with a bewildered respect. "Mr. Sanchez," she said, "I'm calling to inform you that an anonymous benefactor has settled Eva's entire outstanding balance." In full, Leo dropped the phone. He slumped against the wall, his legs suddenly unable to support him. The weight of years of crushing debt, a burden that had stooped his shoulders and haunted his sleep, vanished in an instant. He gasped for air, a sob of pure, cathartic relief shaking his entire body. It was a miracle, a genuine, inexplicable miracle. He didn't understand it. He didn't know who was responsible. But for the first time in a very long time, he could breathe. The miracles continued. A package arrived from a medical supply company containing a state-of-the-art home nebulizer for Eva, a machine he had only ever seen in the hospital. A grocery delivery service left boxes of fresh food and organic produce on his doorstep. It was as if a guardian angel was watching over them, silently tending to their needs, anticipating their every hardship and resolving it with quiet, anonymous efficiency. Leo felt a profound sense of gratitude, but it was mingled with a deep, unsettling mystery. Who was doing this, and why? He felt a strange sense of being observed, not in a sinister way, but with a gentle, protective gaze. He didn't know that from the tinted window of a sleek black car parked across the street, Alistair Blackwood watched him, his heart aching with a complex mixture of pity, admiration, and a burgeoning, unfamiliar tenderness. Each anonymous act of kindness was a balm on his own wounded soul, a way of repaying the janitor who had shown him that goodness still existed in the world. He was quietly intervening, mending the life his company had carelessly broken. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough. The true turning point came with another call, this one from Eva's primary doctor. His voice was filled with an excitement Leo had never heard before. "Leo, it's unbelievable. Dr. Eris Thorne, the world's leading specialist in pediatric pulmonary fibrosis, has reviewed Eva's case. He's flying in from Switzerland to consult. An anonymous foundation is covering all his expenses and has endowed a grant specifically for Eva's treatment." Leo was speechless. Dr. Thorne was a name he had read about in desperate, late-night internet searches, a figure as remote and unattainable as the moon. And now he was coming here, for Eva. This was no longer just a series of fortunate events. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign of salvation. Leo had to know who was behind it. He needed to thank them, to understand why a complete stranger would move heaven and earth for his daughter. His quiet observation had to end. Alistair knew he had to meet Leo again, not as a powerful benefactor, but as a man. He needed to see him, to talk to him, to bridge the chasm that separated their two worlds. He arranged it carefully. Knowing Leo would be at the hospital for Eva's preliminary consultation with Dr. Thorne's team, Alistair went there himself. He shed his armor of impeccable suits and commanding presence, dressing instead in simple slacks and a soft cashmere sweater. He looked not like a CEO, but like any other worried man waiting in the sterile, antiseptic-smelling halls of a hospital. He found Leo in the hospital cafeteria, staring blankly into a cup of lukewarm tea. His shoulders slumped with the familiar weight of anxiety. Alistair's heart gave a painful thud. He approached the table slowly. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle. Leo looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. He saw not the powerful CEO from the office, but the broken man he had found slumped over his desk. "You?" Leo whispered, a look of profound confusion on his face. "Mr. Blackwood." "Please," Alistair said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Call me Alistair." He gestured to the empty chair opposite Leo. "May I?" Leo simply nodded, still trying to process the impossible coincidence. Alistair sat down, the small table feeling like a vast expanse between them. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the quiet hum of the cafeteria filling the space. It was Alistair who finally broke it. "I looked for you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "After that night, they told me you were gone. I am so sorry, Leo. What happened with your job? It was a mistake. A terrible bureaucratic error. It was not my intention." Leo shook his head, a gesture of dismissal. "It doesn't matter now." His eyes, filled with a dawning, unbelievable suspicion, searched Alistair's face. "The money, the hospital bills, Dr. Thorne. Was that you?" Alistair met his gaze without flinching. His gray eyes were clear and steady. He gave a single, slow nod. "Yes." Leo stared at him, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of the generosity. "But why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I am nobody. A janitor who ruined your property." He couldn't bring himself to say, "blanket." The word was too small for the weight it carried. Alistair's expression softened, a deep, raw vulnerability surfacing in his eyes. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, worn photograph, the same one from his laptop screen. He slid it across the table. "This was my wife, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And our daughter, Lily." Leo looked at the smiling faces, his heart aching in sympathy. "They were killed," Alistair continued, his voice barely a whisper. "A car accident 3 years ago. I was driving. I survived. They didn't." The confession hung in the air, heavy and shattering. "That night in the office, I was at my lowest point, the anniversary of their deaths. I was lost. And then you did what you did. You sacrificed something precious to you. For me, a stranger who had everything. You didn't even hesitate." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "That blanket, Leo, it was more than just a piece of cloth. It was an act of grace. It was the first moment of selfless kindness I had witnessed since I lost them. It woke me up. It reminded me that there is still good in this world. There is still purity." Leo was stunned into silence, his own struggles seeming to shrink in the face of this man's profound, all-consuming grief. He finally understood. This wasn't charity. It was a connection forged in a moment of shared humanity. Seeing the raw pain in Alistair's eyes, Leo felt his own walls begin to crumble. He found himself telling Alistair everything. About Eva's diagnosis, the years of struggle, the crushing loneliness of being a single parent to a sick child, the constant, gnawing fear of failing her. He spoke of his late wife, Maria, who had died in childbirth, a grief he had buried under the relentless demands of survival. As he spoke, Alistair listened with an unwavering, steady intensity that made Leo feel truly seen for the first time in years. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply listened, his presence a quiet, solid anchor in Leo's turbulent sea. When Leo finished, his voice hoarse, Alistair simply reached across the table and placed his hand gently on Leo's arm. The contact was warm, firm, and profoundly comforting. In the sterile quiet of the hospital cafeteria, two broken men, a janitor and a billionaire, forged a bond over their shared tragedies. Two solitary islands connected by a bridge of grief and a single, selfless act of kindness. They had found each other. The consultation with Dr. Thorne was a whirlwind of hope and complex medical terminology. The Swiss doctor was brilliant, his confidence a soothing balm on Leo's frayed nerves. He proposed an experimental treatment, a gene therapy procedure that was Eva's best and only chance at a normal life. The risks were significant, but the potential reward was everything. The procedure was approved, fast-tracked by the hospital, which was now tripping over itself to accommodate the wishes of its mysterious, high-powered benefactor. There was just one final hurdle. Because the treatment was experimental and involved a significant allocation of hospital resources, it required final approval from the hospital's Charitable Oversight Committee. The chair of that committee was a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was Eva's maternal grandmother, and she despised Leo with every fiber of her being. Eleanor had never forgiven Leo for what she perceived as his role in her daughter Maria's death. She saw him as a low-class failure who had stolen her daughter and then allowed her to die. She had cut off all contact after the funeral, refusing to even acknowledge her granddaughter's existence. Now, she held Eva's life in her perfectly manicured hands. The meeting was held in a sterile, intimidating boardroom, the long, polished table a battlefield. Leo stood at one end, feeling small and out of place. Eleanor sat at the other, flanked by stony-faced administrators, her expression a mask of cold, imperious disdain. She was the personification of cruel, elitist power, her expensive suit a suit of armor, her jewelry glittering like shards of ice. She let the doctors present the case, her face impassive. Then, she turned her cold, unwavering eyes on Leo. "So," she began, her voice dripping with venom, "the janitor comes to us begging for a handout, a very, very expensive handout." The room grew heavy with a tense, uncomfortable silence. Leo stood his ground, his hands clenched at his sides, his gaze steady. He would not let her break him. "Not here. Not now. This is not for me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It is for your granddaughter." Eleanor let out a short, derisive laugh. "My granddaughter is the unfortunate product of a disastrous mistake my daughter made. You are a nobody, a complete and utter failure, and you will not lay a hand on my money, or the money of this foundation, to fund some desperate pipe dream surgery. You couldn't even hold down a simple cleaning job. How dare you stand here and pretend you have any right to make decisions for that child?" Her words were like stones, each one a calculated blow designed to humiliate and shatter him. "You are unfit. You are unworthy. The request is denied." She slammed a leather-bound folder shut, the sound a definitive crack of doom. The administrators shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to challenge her. Leo felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. He had come so close, only to be destroyed by this woman's bitter, unrelenting hatred. He was about to turn, to walk away in defeated silence, when a soft click echoed through the room. The boardroom door swung open. Alistair Blackwood stepped inside. He was no longer the grieving man from the cafeteria. He was the king in his castle, dressed in an impeccable custom-tailored charcoal suit that radiated power. His presence was a commanding force that immediately shifted the gravity of the room. Every eye turned to him. He walked calmly to the table and stood beside Leo, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He turned his cool, gray eyes on Eleanor Vance. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that nonetheless carried to every corner of the room. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" she snapped, clearly unnerved by this sudden intrusion. "My name is Alistair Blackwood," he said simply. A wave of gasps and whispers rippled through the room. The name was a thunderclap. "I am the anonymous benefactor funding this procedure. I am the friend who has been looking after Eva." Eleanor's face went pale, her mask of cruel confidence beginning to crack. Alistair's gaze was like polished steel. "You speak of worth," he continued, his voice dangerously quiet. "You sit here in your expensive clothes, judging a man's value by the size of his bank account. Let me tell you about true worth. I have seen this man, Leo Sanchez, sacrifice the only precious thing he owned in the world, a worn, threadbare blanket belonging to his sick daughter, to save a piece of my property, a laptop he could have let be destroyed without a second thought. He did it without expectation of reward, for a complete stranger. That single, selfless act has more honor, more integrity, and more pure human value than every dollar you have ever hoarded." He paused, letting his words sink in, each one a precise, devastating blow. "You call him a failure. I call him a hero. You see a janitor. I see the finest man I have ever had the privilege to know." He then delivered the final, crushing blow. "As of this morning, my foundation has acquired a controlling interest in this hospital wing. We are funding the construction of a new, state-of-the-art pediatric research center, to be named the Maria Sanchez Center for Hope, and I am appointing Leo Sanchez to the executive board to oversee its charitable endeavors. So, you see, Mrs. Vance, your opinion is no longer relevant. The procedure is approved." He looked down at the speechless, utterly defeated woman. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a life to save." He turned to Leo, his eyes softening with a profound, undeniable tenderness. "Let's go, Leo. It's over." He led a stunned, trembling Leo from the room, leaving behind a scene of absolute, silent humiliation. The Savior had not just intervened. He had completely and utterly vanquished the darkness. Eva's surgery was a resounding success. The weeks that followed were filled with the quiet, hopeful sounds of recovery. The steady beep of monitors, the soft rustle of nurses' uniforms, and, eventually, the beautiful, miraculous sound of Eva's clear, effortless laughter. Alistair was a constant presence, a quiet pillar of strength for Leo. He sat with him for long hours in the hospital, brought him food, and talked with him about everything and nothing. The cavernous gap between their worlds had vanished, replaced by a deep and abiding bond. When Eva was finally discharged, it was not to the small, threadbare apartment Alistair had arranged for a beautiful, sun-drenched house in a quiet neighborhood with a large backyard for Eva to play in. It was a home, not just a place to live. One evening, after they had tucked a healthy, sleeping Eva into her new bed, Leo and Alistair sat in the warm, softly lit living room. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken emotions. Leo turned to Alistair, his heart overflowing with a gratitude so immense it felt like it might break him open. "Alistair," he began, his voice thick, "I don't know how I can ever repay you. You've given my daughter back her life. You've given us everything." Alistair turned to face him, his gray eyes shimmering with a profound intensity. "Leo," he said, his voice low and earnest, "you don't understand. You repaid me before I ever did anything for you. That night in my office you saved me. My heart had been a locked, silent room for 3 years. Your kindness, it was the key. You opened the door and let the light in again. You didn't just save Eva. You saved me from the ghost I had become." He moved closer, his gaze never leaving Leo's. "When I lost Amelia and Lily, I thought I had lost the capacity for love, for joy, for a future. But watching you, seeing your quiet strength, your selfless love for Eva, your unwavering dignity in the face of so much hardship, it reawakened something in me. I haven't just been helping a friend, Leo. I've been falling in love." The confession, so raw and sincere, hung in the air between them. Leo's heart pounded in his chest. He saw in Alistair's eyes not pity, but partnership. Not charity, but a deep, abiding affection that mirrored the feelings that had been quietly growing in his own heart. He saw a future he had never dared to dream of, one filled with safety, security, and a love that was as gentle as it was powerful. A slow, sincere smile spread across Leo's face. He reached out and took Alistair's hand, his grip firm and sure. "I think," he said softly, "I've been falling in love with you, too," in that quiet, gentle moment. All the pain and hardship of the past dissolved, replaced by the profound, cathartic promise of a shared future. They were no longer two broken men. They were whole. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the beautiful home, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, joyful sprites. The sound of happy shrieks and laughter echoed from the lush green backyard, where a vibrant, healthy Eva was chasing butterflies, her dark curls bouncing with every step. She was the picture of health, her lungs strong, her spirit bright. Leo stood at the kitchen window watching her, a mug of tea warming his hands. The hollow, haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, settled peace. He was no longer a janitor. He was the director of the Maria Sanchez Center for Hope, a foundation that had already helped dozens of families navigate the terrifying world of pediatric illness. He had found his purpose not just in being a father, but in extending his quiet, gentle strength to others who were lost in the same darkness he had once known. Alistair came up behind him, wrapping his arms around Leo's waist and resting his chin on his shoulder. The icy, commanding CEO had vanished, replaced by a man filled with a soft, radiant warmth. He was still a brilliant businessman, but his work was now tempered with a compassion and philanthropy that stunned the corporate world. His true wealth, he often said, was not in his portfolio, but in this home with this family. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Alistair murmured, his voice filled with love as he watched Eva. "She is," Leo agreed, leaning back into the embrace. "We are so lucky." On the wall of the living room, two objects were framed side by side in a simple, elegant display. One was a small, silver baby rattle, polished to a high shine. The other was a small, stained square of pale blue wool. They were relics of two different pasts, two separate griefs, now woven together into a single, beautiful story of salvation and love. They were a family, forged not by blood, but by a chance encounter, a spilled cup of coffee, and the simple, world-changing power of a single, selfless act. This story is a testament to the profound and often unseen power of a single act of kindness. It serves as a universal fable, reminding us that in a world that often feels transactional and cold, the purest currency we possess is our capacity for compassion. Leo's selfless sacrifice, born from his innate goodness, was a seed of hope planted in the barren heart of a grieving man. That seed grew into a forest of miracles, proving that the love of a father is a force capable of moving mountains, and that a gentle heart holds more power than all the wealth in the world. It is a story of redemption, not just for the man who was saved from poverty, but for the man who was saved from despair, showing that in saving others, we often find the truest path to saving ourselves. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the goodness of humanity, we hope you'll carry its message with you. Perhaps it will inspire you to look for the quiet sufferers and hidden saviors in your own life, or to perform a small act of kindness, never knowing the seismic impact it might have on a stranger's world. The greatest miracles are often born from the simplest moments of human connection. We invite you to join our community of viewers who cherish stories that uplift the spirit and celebrate the enduring power of love. Please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring narratives that will warm your heart and inspire your soul. Your support allows us to continue creating and sharing these heartwarming stories with the world. We'll see you in the next one.